So, you are the senior writer for Sucker Punch Productions. You just got done with Ghost of Tsushima, and I assume you're on sort of a high right now. You guys just picked up, what was it? Player's Choice with the Game
Yeah.
Awards. So
Yeah. Oh, so exciting.
I have to
Oh
assume,
man.
right? And you guys are kind of probably close to top billing for Best Game of the Year.
Oh, I hope. I mean, who knows, right? But oh yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I guess that's all you can do right now. Um,
Exactly.
as a writer who works on a game of that scale, what would that kind of mean to you if you guys did pick up that game of the year?
Gosh, it's honestly hard because that's never happened to me before. It's funny you ask because I was kind of thinking about it. And it feels surreal. Like if we got it, it's hard to even imagine it'd be an honor. It blows me away. Like even that we got nominated and even that it's so close, it's just your head's down for so long. And then with COVID, it's also we launched and we all kind of celebrated from home, so it also in a weird way doesn't even it's a very surreal experience right now, I guess. That's
I,
how
I
I'd sum it up.
I have to assume it's difficult, especially with how the year's been. You guys can't celebrate together, and if you do win, at what point will you be able to be in the same room to kind of give each other a pat on the back? Um,
Totally.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I hope you guys do pick that up, and I do think you have a very good shot. And going up against a company like Naughty Dog has to be stressful, but also thrilling to know that people think that highly of your game.
That you summed it up. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So, but you didn't start kind of at the top with Sucker Punch. You've been writing for, as far as I know, when you were young. Very, very young is what I picked up, correct?
It's true. It's something I've always done and it's been a true passion since I can remember. Yeah.
Now, when you were younger, you were more of a creative writer, right? Books and kind of short stories and stuff like that. So, what really brought you into the realm of video game writing? Because it's an entirely different process, and I'm sure it's a very shocking process to get into when you start.
It is 100%. Like we just said, writing ever since I can remember, true passion. And same with video games. I've been playing. I do actually have distinct memories of my first encounter with video games, but it's always been a passion, something I've always loved. But it never dawned on me that you could write them and get paid for it, and it was a job. And I don't know why. It just that didn't cross my mind until I was working for University in Northern British Columbia, and one day an email came across my inbox from Ubisoft, and it was advertising this video game writing internship. I was like, what this is a thing. Oh my God. And that was the first time that I was like, this is a thing. You can do this. This could be a job. And of course, I applied immediately. I was lucky enough to get it, and then truly, like my second day there, I got to be with Corey May, and I just remember going to Corey and being like, Corey, please hire me. And thankfully, at the end of the internship, they did.
Um,
So
was that internship for Assassin's Creed Black Flag? Is that where you
it
started with
was.
Ubisoft?
It was. It was so cool because with Corey, I actually got to work on Watch Dogs as well. We got to work on a lot of games, but primarily Black Flag was
Okay.
the big one. Yeah.
So before I get into how your career started, I want to go back to University of Northern British Columbia, where you got your bachelor's and master's. You started with an English and history major for your bachelor's. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah, it was a joint major.
So, being that we're rooted in history, I have to ask, what was the push? I understand the English you've been writing since you were an adolescent. What really brought you to that history portion of that degree?
they're so related, because it's just like what intrigues about writing, of course, is content and why and motivations. Not only, as far as people, why are people this way? What are they doing? What forms them? But of course, place, and then space in addition to that, and then an idea of landscape and formation, and it's like that's all about that's history, and it was just for me, this is like delving into the why of things, and then the how, and then just looking at that, and then having it inform then a creative process. If you can have a little bit of understanding, but then too knowing where that understanding is coming from and the lens at which you're reading and all this stuff. Then kind of taking that as a basis, and then doing your own thing, letting it inform your own creative process and questions you have. It's just really fascinating to me, but to me they're very intertwined. They're very one absolutely is informing the other, and vice versa, in fact.
That's a very interesting point. I like that. Did you find when you were in that degree that you were kind of influenced more by a certain period, like a certain time period?
Oh, good question. Good question. Nothing in particular. For my master's, I was looking at kind of like the mid to late 1800s, a very, a specific kind of Austrian, German era, in particular with Sacher-Masoch. So it was very narrow. But that, I guess that one would be the one that stood out. But in general, I just love whatever class we were doing. It was just like, yes, give me more. Tell me about these people. What is going on? Tell me about this place. What I loved was the diversity of history, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is very diverse, especially when you're kind of covering a whole span, not even just time, but civilizations.
Exactly.
And it's kind of interesting, you took this internship not knowing the game that you would be starting on and the series you would be starting on, which is huge on history. Um, there's universities that use Assassin's Creed to kind of teach a rudimentary version of the history. I know Assassin's Creed 2 is used. So, you've got this bachelor's in English and history, and then you go on in this internship with Ubisoft for Assassin's Creed. Did you find that your love for history was kind of driving how you were writing for Assassin's Creed, or were you kind of more on like the fictional side of that story?
Well, it was with Corey and with Black Flag. What I got to do was read the script and then comment on it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was my contribution there. Was just, it wasn't any kind of creative writing. It was more of an editing role. And then of course under Corey's wing. But to what you're talking about, it was so fun because, for instance, I remember this moment where he's talking about makeup, and how a character is kind of putting on using coal, etc., to put on a little makeup as a disguise, and then you're like, oh, is that what they would have done back then? Like, is this, really coal for eyeliner? I don't know. What if? So it was just so fun to delve into that. And then kind of like you're saying, if you have training in this, you know where to go for your sources. So that was fun. I was like, I know where to go.
Yeah. And I can't imagine it's easy when you have such a passion for history, or even an appreciation for it. Looking at a game like Assassin's Creed that's set in a really real time period, features characters like Blackbeard that were very real, and then having to kind of deviate from that history to create this story that has to be fantastical and create this and involve this ancient civilization. So is that, and thinking forward to Ghost of Tsushima, which also has a bit of a historical connotation to it, is that difficult as somebody that does appreciate history? Is it difficult to kind of separate?
It was a lesson for sure. And the thing that I needed to understand and came to understand was we're not creating a simulator. This is a work of fiction informed by history. And then I think what really sealed, or I'm not sure the word, but what we used on Ghost is don't break the time machine. So we're not, this is a work of fiction. We are taking liberties, but we want to immerse them. If we're telling the player they're playing in, Kamakura era Japan, then we do everything we can to not break that fantasy. And I know Assassin's Creed does that too. Whatever time period they're in, they try to remain as true as possible. But it's a work of fiction and it is a game. So at the end of the day, it must be fun. So yeah, take a little license here and there. And then that's just the thing to remember is anytime you can stay true, stay true. And then if you're going to take a liberty, do it in a way that you're not going to break fantasy or make the player feel like, what the, they would never,
So that's a kind of an interesting point to bring up because then you have situations like EA went through a couple years ago with Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5. People kind of lost their heads when they included female soldiers on the Russian front and then really tuned things out for multiplayer. So say you're in that situation where you are developing a game for a time period that's very recent, 1940s, relatively recent. Do you feel like diversity is important enough to kind of separate itself from or separate the game from the accuracy to a point where you may kind of push away some players because the current climate and everything?
Right. No, absolutely. I think the big thing to remember too, beyond the fact that we're not a historical simulator, is that we're also, no matter whether you like it or not, every game sends a message, whether you intend it to or not. So for me, I know the kind of messages I want to send. I stand behind them 100%. And I think diversity is a positive message to send, and it's something I want out there because you're helping to shape a future. So yes, that might push some people away, but it's also going to draw other people in. It's going to speak to other people. And then too, I think you kind of just have to look at also how you do this and what opportunities are available to you. And, I hear just, for example, a lot of, whether women are included in this or that. Oftentimes, if you do the research, they absolutely are. It's in different ways and different roles. And two, they aren't cataloged by a lot of different sources, but this one source did catalog them. And you come to find out they played extremely important roles that, just weren't documented for, as we know, all these biased reasons. And but you know what, that's the fun of the historical research, is finding that out and being like, haha, well, what do we have here? They actually did. In amazing ways. And they're just cowboys is, I don't know why I'm thinking of cowboys, but a lot of African American men they were the cowboys. But if you look at cinema and and just kind of a cursory glance, you wouldn't know that. It's only when you get into the research that you come to find out, holy shit, like.
And do you think there's a bit of a fear as a developer that's making a game, let's just say like Red Dead Redemption 2, again, set in a historical period that happened, obviously fictional characters all around, but is there this underlying fear where you want to be respectful of history? And yeah, there were African American cowboys, but it's such a touchy notion, especially sadly in the gaming industry, that you just want to separate yourself from it.
I just go for it.
Good, I'm glad.
For me, yeah. But part of that is my position. I can, so I do. But I think we always just go back to that. Even if you're trying not to make a statement, even if you're trying not to rock the boat,
You
that in
will.
itself is a very powerful statement and stance. So either way. So I just feel like hold what's true to you. Go for it. Fucking go for it. Stand behind it.
Good. I think that something that should be imparted on new developers, new writers, and especially
Mhm.
as we're trying to diversify gaming a lot more. Um, and I think also, we want to look at games as entertainment, but I think they can be an educational tool. Uh, Again, going back to Black Flag, most of it is fictional. Uh, you just kind of deal with it. But there was Blackbeard was a real character. Port Royale is a real place. It's got to be difficult trying to keep fiction while also making sure the players walk away with something. Um, and so in Assassin's Creed, you were just an editor, but for Ghost of Tsushima, you were kind of on the front line. You were there writing the whole thing. Now, again, for that, was that more? Were you involved more in the fictional side of it, or did you also get to do some of the research into that period of Japan?
Yeah, absolutely. I came on where are we? So I've been there for about a little over 2 years, like 2 years, 2 months ish. Um, and so when I came on, they were well into development, which means like down and dirty research and also do as much as you can all the time in any spare moment. Um, so, and always actually, any game I'm on, that's, because it's always based on something. So yeah, that's my first go-to is hit the books. but but kind of to what you were saying earlier, the hope is, be as true as you can to the history. And the hope is then you inspire people in the game to go read for themselves. So maybe they played something in the game and they're like, oh, is that a thing? The best thing for me would be that they would look it up and get into it. They'd find out, they'd start doing their own research, and it could lead to true and real understandings of the world as it was. So that's the hope, I think, is
Okay.
that it can inspire research.
And when you do research for a game like Tsushima, um, you want to get the setting right. You want to make sure it looks right, and that's of course a whole different side of it. But as you're writing, you also, I assume, have to keep that in mind that you're writing characters into a very specific area that is again framed by something real and something that did happen. So when you're
Right.
writing these stories, these scenarios, and all this dialogue, do you have the design element also in mind? So how is it going to look, and how is my writing going to fit into it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because like kind of like we were saying, at the end of the day, it's a game, and it has to be fun. Are the players going to enjoy this? Because if they want a historical simulator, those exist. They would go get one or play one or engage with one rather. They know this is a video game for them to have fun. So that's always the negotiation.
Yeah.
That's always the thing to the balance, the tightrope, to walk, is that like remain true, don't break the time machine. Is it fun? Is it still fun? Okay.
So when it comes to dialogue in that scenario, again, you have to frame it around something that happened, but like you said, it has to be fun, it has to be interesting, and it has to engage people. Do you find it difficult, or I guess more difficult, because you also worked on Far Cry, and was the Yeti expansion, and Watch Dogs. So do you find that writing for a historical game is more difficult because you have to keep that dialogue in mind? You can't have, a samurai running around talking like a valley girl or anything like that. So
Right, right. Well, what's interesting is that I almost think writing for a contemporary game is more difficult because it's live and it's so open to criticism. So, say Watch Dogs, for instance, that was nerve wracking. because here I was in Montreal, Canada, trying to write for characters who lived in England, and and of course, let's always every video game has cultural consultants. So this is not, there are levels and checks and a whole slew of things just to help aid this process of being authentic. But still, I think that was more nerve-wracking because there's, a whole country of people who are like, nope, no one would ever see that. Whereas medieval Japan, would they have said that? I don't know. Maybe. It's there's a little more leeway. There's not someone who's going to call you out immediately. But I think though the trick then is just that there are universal things people deal with, and that and emotions people have, and ways of reacting. And I think if you can tap into that, and then just kind of remain true to your time period, that's the key to resonating and to creating an authentic experience.
So I would think then a historical game has to have that touch of modernism so that you can connect to it, correct?
Right. And I think exactly, and that's the universal thing. Like, just, bad examples, but people will always be jealous. People will always fall in love. Parents will always hurt. Like, there are just things that no matter where you are in time or space, they go on. And I think that's the thing you always just kind of have to tap into, is that, like, beyond the trappings of culture and all of that, what are the core things people deal with that everyone is going to understand, no matter where they are.
Yeah. I think that is an important part of any sort of writing too, not even just video game writing. That's you're putting a piece out there that somebody has to find themselves in, I guess we'll say.
Exactly. Yeah.
So okay, so you've worked on you've worked on several high profile games. Speaking specifically on history, at least two. If you could move on to another time period, and if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, we want to develop a game, but we're not sure when. We want it to be at some point in the past," where do you think you would land?
Oh man, that's a really good question. It's probably stereotypical, but everyone loves, like, Roman, history, and that would be fun. It's just so ripe. Two, it would be so weird. But I'd love to do, my master's was just in psychoanalysis, and just kind of like when that was all hot and heavy, and two, just my interest was the blend into how it affected literary fiction. But I think that would be fun. I think that would be fun to do a total kind of mindfuck psychoanalysis crazy town game. It would be weird. I don't even know how you would go about it, but to combine that with the fashion of the time, I just think it could be bizarre and amazing. That might be the weird one that I would somehow like to do. I don't know.
I mean, hey, everything's possible, especially when it's in a digital medium that you have control of everything.
All right.
So we're talking a Roman game. There's some out there. I wouldn't say there's a lot. You just got Odyssey, right? Odyssey. The Total War series, of course, touched on it. Do you think you would do a different take on Rome, or is the classical version of it so perfect for entertainment that you just kind of spin a new story to it?
I kind of think that's it. I kind of think it's just like the classical. Everyone can relate to that. There's so much richness there. And then, just like you said, okay, cool. Well, what's the new, different story experience that you could give players? so they can indulge in this wonderful playground that they know and love, and yet find something new and exciting.
Okay. Do you know what type of game you would make it? Role playing, action adventure?
Oh, it's hard. I've worked on open world games. Like, this is what I
Yeah,
know,
that's
this
right.
is what I love. And I mean too, if we're gonna go there, that would be, I think, as a player, that's what I would want to do. I would want the freedom to go and explore um, a world. So that would be my first inclination.
Okay. I mean that's kind of where the industry's going. Open world is
It
the big thing. And as a writer, I have to assume it's not easy to write for an open world game because you're not just writing this one linear story. You also have to factor in all the branching side characters and side stories. Is there like a is there one tip you could give somebody that's getting into that would make their lives even just an iota easier?
Wow. You're right. It's true. That's what I love about it, is it's truly a different kind of writing that until I was in it and doing it, I mean, I'd never been exposed to anything like that. And then the way it asks you to think is so different. Like you said, I grew up writing short stories and just very kind of classic, typical stuff. And then when you're in university, this is what you're being taught, right? And then even to look at a linear type of games, well, that translates very well. But an open world, that's so different. I kind of I think I've mentioned this before in other areas, but a writer I really admire is Jill Murray, and she teaches a class on game writing. And one of her exercises for students is to just like go out to a public space, sit down, listen to people talk, and write it down. And then just kind of like pick up on these fragments of conversation, how people are saying what they're saying. And then just, you go for like 20 minutes, right? And I think that's really valuable in that it's very much an open world game. If you were to be in an open world game and you were to just go and sit and set your controller down, the hope would be that the world around you is still cycling and living and breathing. And that even if you as a player just want to put the controller and just sit, you're still being entertained, you're still being engaged. Um, and then if you're really good at it, you'll still feel like the world is responding to you. Not that you're just there as this little invisible ghost listening and hearing, but that you're also being noticed and acknowledged and engaged with. So I think that would be maybe my advice. That might make it easier, but it's hard. It's just hard.
And I guess to complicate that more, let's talk about again, we're all big into history over here. So now you're doing a historical open world game. You don't have that luxury of being able to sit there and listen to, even like feudal Japan. You can't just sit in the middle of a dynasty and listen. Um, is there something that can kind of help drive those background conversations that are sometimes happening between NPCs? Because again, you can't make it too modern, I assume, but you also want it to resonate.
Right. Oh, 100%. It's so odd you're asking this question because at this very moment, I have my book, Daily Life in Japan. And this book is amazing. And books like this are amazing. It's just a glimpse into the daily life. And this goes through everything from like, what's it like to be a peasant? What's it like to be a samurai? What was marriage? Doctors, craftsmen, religion, the home, the family, how food. And so just I think that kind of research, anytime I'm reading this book, I'm getting ideas. I'm just, and like you say, so it's placing, for example, food in a very specific time period and how they treated food, what they ate, da 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 da. But then you get little glimpses of just like kind of the human side of it, of just um, or marriage, for example. Like, yes, certain rituals, certain things to do, but it was also considered kind of polite to get a little drunk. Well, that's super fun, and like, I'm sure things must have been embarrassing, gotten slightly embarrassing for people, but it was expected, acknowledged, and forgiven. However, everyone's going to be embarrassed by their kind of drunk mom at their wedding. So it's just, I think that's the fun, is just looking at the mundane, looking at the day to day, and then the fun, and like we were saying, the things that we can all relate to within that.
And who is the author of that book?
This is Louis Frederick, translated by Eileen M. Lowe.
Okay. And that covers, I guess, I mean, you were mentioning samurai, so I assume that goes back quite a ways.
Yeah, so this is 1185 to 1603.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And they have this in particular was interesting because they have a whole series, daily life in, and then they do all kinds of stuff. But this one in particular is special to me, and something that I look at often, just because it covers a whole spectrum of people, and then because it does touch on the mundane and the things that we all go through, going to the bathroom. How did they do that? Where did they do it? What did it mean? Love it.
Well, that
Right.
actually that brings up kind of another interesting point. Things as mundane as that weren't the same, and they still aren't the same across cultures. So that's again, speaking of to somebody that's just starting, I have to assume that's another bit of advice. Like, you have to think down to even like kind of a molecular level of how different things can be through societies, through times.
It's true, and it's true, and then kind of too, like, I love that we're talking about going to the bathroom, but things like going to the bathroom, if you start to really dig into that, it's a whole, there's politics attached to that, to where you do, who can dispose of waste, how they can dispose of waste, what goes on in waste disposal places, who's there, what kind of conversations, a lot of things that appear to be mundane and kind of meaningless or unimportant, when you really get into them, and this as a historian, carry significant weight, and can truly tell you about a culture and power dynamics of the time, and it's super revealing. So things like farting and pooping, might be like, ew, gross, but like, nope, that's where lines are drawn. That's where class divisions are made, where power is done, isn't a fart, but it is. And I think too, that's why I love history and writing, is because, things like that, and just.
You get to delve into things that most people take for granted and don't really
Right.
think there's anything more to it. And
Right.
that's got to create one heck of a rabbit hole when it comes to game development. It's
Oh, it
just
does. Sometimes you have to stop yourself. It's just enough that, you're like, how did I get here? I don't know.
it's like the Wikipedia effect. You start at one page, you end up 400 pages down.
Totally. Yes.
um, so let's go back to when you started as the internship, because I think it's an interesting transition to go from creative writing to game writing, and I want to leave the history behind a little bit. Um, I'm not, or I was a creative writer for quite a while, and then I switched over to content writing. But even still, I know that going from any sect of writing to another one, or every discipline, is different. But video game writing is kind of so out there because there are so many different levels to it. What was the kind of the shock of going from that master's to creative writing to starting as an internship and looking over all these different documents you're being given?
I think honestly it was mostly a shock of ego, because I had published, I was in the midst of my master's. I was like, I don't know how to write. And I do, and I did. And I think credit needs to be given to, just because you're not in games, if you have done those things, credit where credit is due. However, there is a lot to learn, and I had a lot to learn. So it was kind of checking that at the door, you know. It was like, know my skill, know my worth, but also know I had a lot to fucking learn. And to sometimes just shut up and listen, take it in, you know. I think for me that was the biggest transition, is because, like you said, every discipline is unique unto itself. And you know, writing translates, it absolutely does, especially if, like you said, you're getting to the core of things. That will always come through no matter what medium. But games in particular is so different, and there's a lot to learn, and it just takes time. It really does. You know, even if you're an awesome, amazing writer, you just need to be in development and ship games and just learn by experience, and that just takes years. You know. So yeah, that was the biggest thing for me, was like, chill, chill, girlfriend.
That's starting over. Yeah, learning and starting over. That's, I mean, it's painful, but I do think I would have to assume it's important, especially when you're starting something new like that. So you went from the internship. The first game after that, was that Far Cry?
Yeah, yeah. So I went from Black Flag to Far Cry 4. Did DLC for that, then Far Cry 5, and then Watch Dogs, and then Ghost.
So, wow, you have spanned piracy. Far Cry 4 was, where was that?
Nepal. It was in
Nepal,
Nepal, yeah.
Japan, and London.
In London, in Montana.
And Montana. So, I mean, how do you go from, you're reading all this, the dialogue and everything for Assassin's Creed 4, and then you're going to Nepal, where everything is, again, completely different time period. Do you have to kind of reset your brain a little bit to know that this is a different area, this is how people are going to talk, I have to just kind of forget everything that I was doing before?
You do, you really do, and it takes time. It does. Even now, you know, even having shipped Ghost, you know, it's a constant refinement and a constant learning process. So still that lesson we were talking about, I'm not done with that. You never are. You'd like to think there's a point, but no, which is the exciting bit, you know, to always be open, always be a student, always be willing to learn. Yeah.
I like that. I think that's important for every aspect of gaming, but I think also for writing, you do have to realize, unless you're doing the same thing over and over again, like when you're doing Ghost of Tsushima, you may be writing DLC, so you can kind of stick to it, but you do have to start over, and
Right.
kind of feel like the new guy again, unfortunately.
Right, always, and always be learning from, always be, like you say, always be learning from your sources, right? Yeah.
And I have to ask, because it's just it's commonplace. Do you have any tips for anybody that wants to start not just regular writing but video game writing, and what should they be in store for, or what are they in store for?
Well, one thing I'm super passionate about, and that I want everyone to do more of, is on an industry side, offer writing internships. The fact that Ubisoft did and does is amazing, and they should be applauded for it. They continue to do it. I think it's fabulous. I hope every studio does that. It's not something that's too typical. Like, often you'll see internships for programmers and this or that, but writing is, and it's more and more studios are doing it, which is excellent. But it is kind of more of a rare offering. Certainly not everyone does it. So industry side, that's something I'm always championing and always pushing for. That I'm always encouraging. And then, if you want to get into it, if that is it all available to you, jump on it. Like, just jump on it, do your best, send the things that speak to you as a person and a writer. But then otherwise, a lot of ways people get into it is through QA. And I think that's really valuable too, because that gives you the design side. That gives you that gets you in the guts of the game, understanding how a game functions on all these different levels. Um, so that's super valuable. But that's a road. That's a real kind of tough road, to
Sounds
get
like it.
into QA, be in QA, and then somehow work your way into whatever position you really want and are passionate about. But then just don't give up. And as you know, even trying to get published, you can't give up and you can't get discouraged. You just keep going. Don't stop.
Absolutely. I mean, and look, it worked for you again. Game of the Year nomination is huge, so it is worth it. The work is worth it. Um, do you think that there's a stigma against like writing interns? Because you're right, the level of writing internships usually vary from very low level college programs to. I mean, honestly, that's really all I ever see. And do you think there's I don't know, like a thing about writing that they don't want interns because they don't think it's going to be taken as seriously, or
The best I could do is just be a guess, because I really don't know. But my guess would be that it's more the size of um, the team within a game company. So within gaming companies, the writing team is tiny, if they have one. A lot of companies don't even have a writing team on in-house.
really?
If they need writing, they might contract out. Yeah. Or just maybe someone on staff will quick do a few lines if needed. So I think that's part of it, is just kind of the profile of writing teams are small. And of course we hear about games like The Last of Us are known for their story, but in the wide scope of things, that's just a tiny sliver compared to all the games that are out there. So I think it's just more sort of the profile and need is speaking to the smaller opportunity. But like you noted, our industry is growing. People are showing a real passion for well-written games that provide a rich experience. So I think too, maybe the need for professional set writing teams are growing and are being fulfilled now. And I think with that will come hopefully the opportunity to then give back with things like a writing internship.
I would hope so. I hope it's something that is encouraged. It's important. It's important to give people an outlet. I know so many people that want to get into writing, or not just writing, but game development, but they don't know where. And
Honestly, yeah, 100%. And I really true, for me, I just feel like it's an obligation, as an industry to reach back to our players and to provide those opportunities for people who have the talent and passion. And like you say, are lacking the door. They're lacking a way to get in. And that's why I love the internship. It's just because it's just like you have passion, you have talent, awesome, doors open to you. But also pay your interns.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different thing we can get into.
It is.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with us. Do you have any closing notes or anything you want to plug or?
Just thank you, Mark. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's
Of
great to
course.
talk to you. I love that you guys are doing this. It's
It's
amazing.
I do too. When I was brought on, I was a little concerned because I'm not a historian. So this was definitely something new, but I think it's important, and I think it's I just think it's a new approach to how history can be written into games, and I think games like Ghost and Assassin's Creed and Total War and everything out there that's ever touched on history, Call of Duty, they highlight the history in the best fashion, and I just think it needs to be a little more expansive to other developers, indie developers, and kind of the like. So thank you
Yeah.
for putting in that effort, because I know it's not easy to write anything that's based on history. Uh, so again, thank you guys, and I think that that game of the year is that nomination is warranted, and I think a win would be mostly warranted as well. And
Thank you so much, Mark.
uh, so again, thank you, and hopefully we'll be talking again more. I'm sure you have more projects in the pipeline that we'll hear about in the future.